Hello, everybody, and welcome to our new episode of Travel Guides here in Travolution Tours. This is your host, Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, PhD historian and tour guide here in the south of England. And this is one of the many volumes that we are creating in the shape of accessible guides here on YouTube, on the internet, to help people find out a bit more about European destinations, which is our specialty, that may be of interest during your holidays and often that are a little bit off the beaten path. Today, however, we're talking about a destination that is very popular, particularly this time of the year with the good weather coming in, which is Croatia. But we really wanted to focus on Croatia beyond the beaches. Now, there is going to be a few places in here which are, of course, very popular and very famous, but we want to give you a bit more of insight as to why you should visit these places beyond the idea of mass tourism, focusing a bit more on the cultural value of elements and the appeal that it has from that perspective. And before we get started, of course, just to say thank you to all of our supporters, sponsors, and donors on our PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. You know who you are. You are an absolute wonderful bunch, and without you, we wouldn't be here. And for those of you interested in continuing to help us promote our virtual project to improve accessibility and affordability in the world of history and tourism, you have the links down on the description of the talk. It is paypal.me/Travolution Tours and buymeacoffee.com/Travolution. And without any further delay, let's actually get started with Croatia beyond the beaches. Well, first things first, let's talk about the three main locations that we're going to be focusing this on. Croatia is actually, although it doesn't may look like much in the map, is actually an incredible country with a lot of things to visit. But today we would like to focus on these three main cities, which are Zagreb, Split, and Dubrovnik. I feel that it's kind of a bit obvious that these are key areas of entrance into Croatia. However, a lot of cruise ships may not stop in all of them. Dubrovnik, yes. Split, sometimes. Zagreb, depending on the weather, so to speak. So I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're not necessarily a cruise type of person, this could be other sort of bases from where to move across in the area of Croatia. It's going to be quite important though if you're traveling to Croatia, that you kind of not necessarily resign yourself, but accept that the best way to move around the country is going to be by car, or indeed, if you have access to that cruise ship over the water. There are, ways of hiring yachts and boats and whatnot to get you all across the beautiful coastline, but these are going to be your three main bases of operations. There are other cities in Croatia and of course villages, but they are not necessarily as easy to reach or as well connected if you are particularly focused on the point of view of getting there with ease. So let's start with Zagreb. Now, Zagreb, which is the capital of Croatia, is sometimes one of those places people don't necessarily think of going to, despite being an incredible city. It is the capital and it is the largest with 700,000 inhabitants and growing. Now, this is a beautiful town that originates as a medieval settlement. The upper town is actually very, very well preserved as a sort of urban area. But it also has a bit of a dark history since the period of the Second World War will, well, essentially make a bit of a mess of this whole area, the Balkans in general, but Croatia specifically. In fact, Zagreb would also be the capital of the Nazi-supported independent state of Croatia at that moment in time. So, I guess one of the good things about going to Zagreb is that you get to look into the good and bad of the country. Like everywhere in the world, everybody has done things that they regret or not, but not necessarily are terribly pleasant. So it's very important that we accept that these beautiful places sometimes also have those, dark little secrets, which are part of their story and not something necessarily to be ashamed of, but to be informed upon. Well, as a result, during this time period, there were many acts of terror and executions that will take over until there is a partisan takeover at the end of the war, and things, I would love to say, go more or less back to normal. But as I'm sure you're all aware, the area of the Balkans is going to be completely ridden by war until pretty much the end of the 20th century. So that's also the reason why going to Zagreb is quite important, because they have a fair few museums in there where you will actually be able to learn some of these other episodes, even in their more recent history. Well, the area has historically experienced earthquakes. This is not necessarily to deter you from going to the area of Zagreb or Croatia. It is simply part of their history. In fact, there was a recent earthquake there in 2020, if I remember correctly, 5.5 in the Richter scale, and the worst one in their history was in the 19th century, which measured 6.3 in the Richter scale. So again, not trying to scare you, just simply something that we need to take into consideration sometimes when we travel to these places. It's not like there is an earthquake happening in there every other day that finishes in Y, but for the sake of precaution, just be aware. Nonetheless, it is a main touristic destination, which actually, like I said, is particularly relevant if you truly want to understand the culture and history of Croatia, because it is home to over 30 collections in museums, galleries, etc., etc. And believe it or not, it has the voted #1 Christmas market in Europe. And this is not something that happened like last year and suddenly they're utilizing it for everything. No, no. This has happened several times. So if you didn't necessarily think of Croatia as a place where to celebrate Christmas in this, type of spirit that seems to be taken absolutely everywhere by storm, well, think twice and, experience perhaps a different aspect of Croatia that maybe you weren't expecting. Well, Croatia overall is a very beautiful country with a lot of beautiful architecture, and you're going to find a big melting pot of architectural styles all over, as you see here on the screen. But there are some very specific, I guess, sites that I would like to recommend. Now, keep in mind, however, that with many examples of architecture, particularly in the main cities, you're going to encounter a lot of heavy renovations. If these were not buildings that were damaged during the Second World War, most certainly many of them were damaged during the War of Independence, or the Yugoslavia War, as most people know it in the area of Europe and the West. So not everything is not everything is as old as it looks, simply because it's required a fair amount of renovation. But speaking of the places that are 100% worth seeing in Zagreb, it is a must that you actually see the cathedral. And this is in the neighborhood of Capitol, which is the area of the church leadership historically since the Middle Ages. It is actually the second tallest building in the country, and the Gothic spires of the cathedral have been dominating the landscape for, well, pretty much since the moment they were completed. They actually measure 108.4 meters. In fact, it's one of the tallest cathedrals in the whole world, period. However, well, you remember how I said there were some problems with earthquakes and what have you not. This is damage from the previous earthquake. One of the reasons why I'm not showing you an actual picture of the cathedral nowadays is because, unfortunately, with the 2020 earthquake, it was damaged and is currently under renovation. It is still entirely worth seeing. In fact, you can see how beautiful it is on the inside. It just looks a little bit weird without two of its main key features at present. But the renovation has been pretty successful and undergone now for some time, so don't let that put you off. The cathedral is still absolutely wonderful and contains some very interesting history that I think you would appreciate, even if nothing else, due to the, well, impact and things we've learned from natural disasters like this. Well, once you're done with the cathedral, you most definitely have to go to the area of the upper town and visit the stone gate, which is the building that you see here. This is from the 13th century, although the facade that you're seeing currently dates from the 18th century. And it's a very important place because it actually contains a shrine to the Virgin. You see that there is a bunch of people actually underneath the archway. This is a very popular destination. Very important element of pop culture, actually, because, well, it's a holy place for Croatian Catholics. And Again, I kind of feel that most people think that the Balkans are an area where the majority of people practice Eastern Orthodoxy, but that's not necessarily the case. And that's also the reason why I think between Zagreb Cathedral and the Stone Gate, you will be able to appreciate the value, role, and significance of religion in Croatia as a whole. And now, perhaps a strange thing to recommend to visit, and yet very important, a cemetery. This is a Mirogosha cemetery, which is actually one of the most important landmarks in the city. This whole complex was actually created in the 19th century because, well, um, it's a moment in time where we start seeing a lot of cemeteries in Europe being done brand new to keep sanitized city centers. So they moved the cemetery to the outskirts. And as a result, well, sometimes the buildings and environments are actually quite beautiful. But more importantly, this cemetery is actually owned and was owned by the city, which actually means all of the different religious denominations of the town are represented in the graves. So you're going to find Catholic burials, Protestant burials, Orthodox burials, Muslim burials, Jewish, non-religious, atheists, etc., etc. And it's also one of the locations for a lot of war memorials, heroes of the state, and important celebrities and big names in Croatian history. So spending, even if it's a morning, an afternoon, whatever you want in here, is quite interesting from the point of view of the cultural impact that it has and its historical legacy. Plus, I generally cannot emphasize this. It's a very, very beautiful place. It's not, I think sometimes that some cemeteries come across as a little bit creepy. This is really not the case. It's a beautiful, peaceful space which actually has some very nice green areas and definitely a nice place for quiet contemplation. Now, from Zagreb, once you see, the key bits, there is also some day trips that I would like to recommend. And this is now where we start accessing the part of off the beaten path, right? Sometimes to access places that are perhaps peculiar, we need to go to the places where most people go to. But that is where I guess, curating aspect of traveling comes into place. Well, the first location that I would like to recommend for you guys to visit is actually this ruin that you're seeing in front of you, which is Andautonia. There is actually a lot of Roman historical sites nearby Zagreb, not just this one specifically, because a lot of people seem to forget that the area of Croatia was the province of Pannonia. And, Pannonia was of particular importance in the early stages of Rome and throughout. There are going to be neighbors, enemies, frenemies, etc., etc. So you find a general countryside that is covered in archaeological remains and in relative good state of conservation because the weather is actually kind enough to keep them alive. Well, this one specifically was discovered in the 19th century, and it is very, very important because this was a very good tribal center under Roman control, which means we actually can see the coexistence of the Roman entities with the locals and what that actually meant for the people. So definitely something to have a look at. And then go and have a look at some greenery. Yeah, Croatia is a country that has beautiful landscapes. It's not just the beach. I appreciate the Mediterranean is super cool and all that jazz, but the countryside of Croatia is truly beautiful and breathtaking. And this is the area of Velebit. It's the largest mountain range in Croatia. It's quite easily accessible from Zagreb. And it is part of the Dinaric Alps. The highest peak is about 1,757 meters, and it's classic karstic landscape. So it's solid, stiff cliffs. There is lots of caves. So if you're also into mountaineering, caving, that type of stuff is a very good area where to practice those natural sports. And they have an insane amount of natural parks to go around and visit with routes, activities, etc. So, go out into nature and enjoy an element of our traveling history and our world, which is actually absolutely free, besides, well, of course, paying for the method of transport getting there. And if you're not into nature and you're not into Roman stuff, don't worry. because I got you covered with some music. The In Music Festival, which as you can see is happening very soon, it's actually one of the top rated festivals in recent years. It's an absolute hidden gem with, as you can see, some very incredible first liners, and it's kind of specialized in sort of indie, rock, metal, electronica, sort of alternative sounds, both with a bit more low-key bands and of course very, very big headliners like Kings of Leon or Massive Attack. I don't think any of those bands require a big introduction in that regards. But in case that you need an even more classic, last year the headliners were the Smashing Pumpkins. So one way or another, Zagreb will find good things for you to do and to enjoy. But now we're gonna leave Zagreb behind to go to the city of Split. Split is just so gorgeous. I generally cannot put it any better than this. It's if you want just to see a beautiful town. I'm not suggesting that Zagreb isn't, but because I feel Zagreb perhaps sometimes has acquired a more modern town sort of look, being the capital. Split is just quintessentially charming in many ways. Well, Split is the second largest city in Croatia and the largest in the region of Dalmatia. It has about 330,000 inhabitants, and it's of course a key destination in the Adriatic shore. The port of Split, in fact, is the third busiest in the Mediterranean, encountering about 4 million passengers per year, not all of which actually stay in Split. They just kind of go from Split to other parts of the world. Well, Split, it's also a town with very old origins. It actually started as a Greek colony. It was renowned already in Roman times due to the palace built by Diocletian, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then it will be a Byzantine colony. It will be occupied by the Venetians, by the Habsburgs, until the formation of Yugoslavia in 1918. So from that regards, it actually has a lot of history throughout time and with diversity, which is also the reason why the city is quite charming, because the historical look and of course the sea views are quite spectacular. So once you are in Split, what should you do? What must you not miss? Well, let's talk about, of course, the palace. You can't go to Split and not see the Ecclesian Palace. I mean, you can, but then I will be having serious questions as to why you bother coming here all the way. This is a UNESCO heritage site. It is included as part of the Old Town listing, and the Palace of the Ecclesian is a massive complex from the 3rd century AD, intended as a residence, but mostly utilized actually as a fortress, which is the diorama that you see here. This is how it used to look back in in the day when it was in full. But eventually it will get a second life actually since the early Middle Ages, and the grounds were actually used to create new homes and businesses, which is why when you walk around it, you sort of find it like this with intersections and interjections left, right, and center. It's a very, very peculiar Roman ruin because it's not purely just a beautiful Roman villa designed for one of the most important emperors of the history of Rome. It's how then the locals have been able to reutilize that to rebuild the city and create a whole new system around it, which makes it very eclectic, very quirky, and very cool, I think. Well, some of the most notorious buildings in the area include the Church of San Martin, which is what you see here on the left is that tiny little thing at the Golden Gate of the palace, and it's actually one of the oldest churches in the city, dating from the 6th to the 9th century. And then, of course, we have the elephant in the room, the Cathedral of St. Domnius. Well, this is perhaps the coolest bit of repurposing of the palace, because it repurposes the Imperial Roman Mausoleum to make essentially this brand new cathedral. Well, I say brand new, brand new at the time, not so brand new now, because well, actually the core of the Roman Mausoleum is still there. The cathedral is kind of built on top of it. They eventually added a bell tower and the church, but it's actually been consecrated since the 7th century, and it's the oldest Catholic church, a Catholic cathedral even, in the whole world, still in use and still with original structure. Look at what I'm saying. Is too many stills in one place, if you see what I mean. So if you are very keen on religious heritage or you are Christian and this is a special thing for you, it's one of those places you genuinely have to go and visit because it's quite unique and very special. The bell tower, though, is from the 12th century. It's a beautiful example of Romanesque. In fact, one of the best examples of Romanesque architecture in all of Croatia and great part of the Balkans. In fact, if you really want to see very good Romanesque, Croatia overall has some very wonderful examples to offer. And then, of course, another place that you must go to is the museum. The Split Archaeological Museum is the best place where to actually engage with the history of the Illyrian people. Just like I was speaking about the Roman area of Pannonia, the Illyrians are going to be one of those early ancient people around the Adriatic, which are going to be in constant, quarrel or contact with the Greeks, the Romans, the Etruscans. So it's very important to engage with that early history to understand what makes this area so special and why that part of their culture is going to be completely definitive. But in general, the Archaeological Museum of Split covers from the early history, let's say prehistory, to the Middle Ages throughout. And just like we had some day trips from Zagreb, let's take you on some day trips, or in fact, one day trip from Split, because, well, although it has a lot to offer, it is still a relatively smaller city with 330,000 people. If you're gonna be in the area for a little while, you may want to actually go and visit Klis. Now, Klis is this charming, incredibly quaint medieval village which actually is essentially a massive fortress near Split. In fact, from the top of the fortress, you can see Split, and particularly at night, the views are quite spectacular with the skylight, being all lit up. And speaking of the history of Illyria, this is actually the original stronghold of the Illyrian people, of the Dalmatia tribe. So that's what the historical importance of the place is. Now, the fortress is mostly in ruins. You can essentially go around and have a walk there, but it eventually becomes a royal castle for the many different Croatian dukes and kings until the time of the Ottoman Wars. In fact, as the map previously shown, this was a frontier area, so it's always been going back and forth, which is why such a massive, impressive fortress had to be put in here. And for those of you perhaps into TV stuff, this was also one of the many locations that was used to film the very famous TV series of Game of Thrones. It actually fills in as the city of Meereen. If that means anything to you, well, you should come and at least check it out. And by the way, I forgot to mention it earlier, if you are into that kind of film locations and maybe that's something that is of more interest to you when you're visiting places, then you should also go and check out the Diocletian Palace because it was also used actually in the series, different parts of the palace for different feelings overall. Well, since we are done with the area of Split, let's move on to our third candidate, which is Dubrovnik. Well, Dubrovnik has definitely become a busier town nowadays than it used to be. In fact, it is considered one of the most important touristic destinations in the Mediterranean, but as a result, I have an incredible warning for you. This is a small town, it's only 41,000 inhabitants, and because of the cruise ships mostly and the filming of Game of Thrones in here as well, they've kind of started having a fair few problems with overbooking, with noises and whatnot. In fact, if they haven't done so already, by the time you may be traveling, you may want to check that they have not included a special new type of ban because the majority of the city is still in its medieval state. You will encounter a ban on trolleys on your luggage with wheels because they make a lot of noise. And as a result, well, you may have to find alternative ways of getting the luggage to your home. This is one of the many things that the city of Dubrovnik is proposing to try and keep tourism under control. As usual, when visiting these places, I wouldn't necessarily send people to Dubrovnik because of the serious problems of mass tourism, but I need you to understand that if you are interested in truly the history of the Adriatic of Croatia, Dubrovnik is a place you must see. Why? Because this is the historical town of Ragusa, one of the most important maritime republics of history. And as a result, well, we kind of need to do a little bit of an exception in here. But because of that is why I'm emphasizing so much and so hardly that you please, please, please be careful and respectful of the tourist. I must insist, this is a small town. If you go off season, you're actually going to find several things closed. You're going to find the town half empty. And as somebody who traveled there off season, I cannot emphasize this more. Go there at any point before the middle of March and the end of October. So travel there in November, travel there in December, just not during Christmas. Go there in January, go there in February, go there in March, unless it's Easter. Go there in April, but please, for the love of God, do not travel to Dubrovnik during the summer. It's gonna be packed because it's such a small town and it still has a medieval layout. It actually can get a bit overwhelming walking around the city. So, keep this in consideration and keep in consideration as well that as a result and because of its problems with tourism, the more you travel on season, the more restrictions you're going to find, and also the more expensive everything is going to be. They quite literally sometimes double prices in certain establishments just to take advantage of it. And that's also why it's so important you travel off season if you can, because that is sustainable. That is helping those people, those communities to keep their jobs, businesses, etc. open and actually distribute the flow of people throughout the year, which, believe it or not, can be a big difference, particularly for those working in the hospitality industry. Well, now that we've done our responsible speech of the day, let me keep on telling you a bit more about the town of Dubrovnik. It's a really, truly beautiful town, to be honest. It's also a UNESCO heritage town, mostly because of the city walls. But the town of Dubrovnik dates itself all the way to the 7th century AD. It actually has a lot of Byzantine influence in its creation. There is going to be Venetian influence as well. And like I said, the incredible, remarkable development of the Republic of Ragusa during the 15th and 16th century. This is essentially like Genoa and Venice, but of Croatia. And Ragusa tends to be forgotten a lot in the history books because Venice and Genoa kind of eclipse it, but Ragusa will bring an insane amount of wealth, culture, and art into Europe. It's just sometimes we don't necessarily notice this. They will also play a very important role in the development of diplomatic relations. And by the way, it's actually perhaps one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to see the golden hour, to see, the sun going down or even the sun going up. This is not from the city center of Dubrovnik, is not in the historical city center. This is already in the sort of more residential parts of the city, which I very much encourage you to go to, not because there is necessarily something to see there, but because then you will be a little bit away from people and you will be able to see things like this. So again, I cannot emphasize this enough. When you go to places like this that are crowded and sometimes overexploited by mass tourism, take a step back, take a breather, and look at it from a different perspective. Because sometimes all we need is a beautiful view like this. And for a beautiful view like this, you don't need to be surrounded by people. In fact, I was literally the only person on a very pleasant May late evening at around 7 p.m. when I took this picture. And when I told everybody, when I took the picture and I went to my friends later on because I was here on a conference, what I had done, they were like, oh my God. We were just here with everyone else doing nothing, feeling clustered, just like, yes, this is why you should always try and find those alternatives wherever you go, because the experience will be much more authentic and it will actually be, well, a real moment that I'm sure you will appreciate in your memories later. Well, unfortunately, and despite I've been building this up a lot, Dubrovnik was also affected by a horrible earthquake in 1667 that nearly destroyed the city. So it had to be rebuilt in stages. But once again, because of its Croatia's very interesting history, the city has had Austro-Hungarian influence and what have you not, and it was also quite severely damaged in 1991 during the Croatian War of Independence in old Yugoslavia. So, in fact, I don't know if you can see it so well in the picture here, but in the in the one on the right, which is one of the views that you get from the top of the walls, you can actually still see bullet holes in there. Don't get me wrong, in the last sort of 10 years, a lot of the town has been sanitized, clean in that regards. There is a lot less ruins hanging around because UNESCO and the European Union have actually given Croatia a lot of money to do this. But it's also a very important thing to commemorate and to understand that this is a country that less than 30 years ago was not in a particularly good situation. But well, the of course thing that you must do for sure is visit as many bits of the city walls as you can. Now, although this is a view of the city walls so that you can understand how beautiful they are and how magnificent they are, this photo is actually not taken from the city walls. It's just from, well, from an attachment to the city walls, but that in theory is outside of the fort of Dubrovnik, properly speaking, which is the fort of St. Lawrence. These are the most incredible city views you will get. The only way of topping this up, I'll show you in just a moment. But the city walls of Dubrovnik are about 2 kilometers, all of which perfectly walkable. A bit difficult if you have mobility problems though. Some areas are better than others. There are some steps, sometimes there are ramps. Not the easiest part of a city to, become fully accessible in that regards. But like with many of these city walls, if you don't want to do 2 kilometers, there are different places where you can, just step off and move on. It's a wonderful way of getting not just impressive views into the Adriatic, but understanding the makeup of the city and actually understanding how small it is, but also appreciating the beautiful landscape nearby it and all that greenery that actually, the area of Dubrovnik and overall Croatia is actually known for. Well, the majority of the construction that you're going to be seeing is all dated between the 13th and 17th century. It's all essentially solid limestone, which is the reason why it's so imposing and one of the reasons why the city walls were barely damaged actually by the earthquakes. Now, besides the overall area of the walls and being in front of them in the area of St. Lawrence, I very much recommend that you also visit St. John's Fort, which is the area that protects the entrance to the city harbor in that regards. And besides that, well, you have a couple of other things. You have the bell tower from the 15th century of the city of Ragusa, which is the emblem of the city in many ways. However, most of it has been renovated in the 20th century and it measures about 31 meters, so it's very easy to see from almost everywhere. Then you have St. Blaise Church. St. Blaise was actually the patron saint of Ragusa, and there is a huge event. There's a very nice festivity on the 3rd of February. So if you want to travel off season and you want to experience something very beautiful and personal to the people of Dubrovnik, do it then. I promise you it's not going to be actually that cold if that's what you're thinking. I know a lot of people panic because traveling in February sounds like anathema, but honestly, it's a good idea. And then you, of course, have the Franciscan Friary, which is also one of the oldest pharmacies in the whole of Europe. They actually have been keeping records of pharmaceutical, I'll say it, recipes and what have you not since the Middle Ages. But it has been rebuilt many a times. So again, without wanting to take away from how beautiful and how incredibly important these buildings are, and often how very well reconstructed they are, it's important that you take into consideration the constant damage that these places have had, and also the reason why it's important we take our impact seriously. Although we are maybe not as devastating as cannon fire or an earthquake, we do have an impact, and these things cost money to be kept well and nice. So let's be responsible and respectful when we are in places like this. And finally, here is your day trip. There are many, many day trips to Dubrovnik. The majority of them are either too long for a whole day. You're going to find this a lot. It's a little bit like when you come to the south of England and everybody wants you to go to Stonehenge. Stonehenge is in the middle of nowhere. You end up stuck in traffic doing not much. Likewise with Dubrovnik. Yes, sure, you can go over to Montenegro, you can cross over to whatever else, fine. But the best thing to do is actually to take a day trip to the island of Lokrum, which is the island that you see in front right now. And this, by the way, is a view that you can take from the from the city walls itself. Lokrum is about 6,000 meters away from Dubrovnik, so it's literally a hop on, hop off sort of situation on the boat, which is quite easy. You don't even need a guided tour for this. This is another thing where often a lot of these mass tourism destinations will rip you off. They will quote unquote give you a guided tour, which is not really a guided tour, it's just literally taking you to and from the island, and you can actually just do that with an ordinary ferry service. So watch out essentially for those kind of not necessarily scams, but tourist traps. And it's actually a very interesting place because it actually has a monastery, although mostly in ruins, and a very beautiful botanical garden. So these are the views now from Lokrum, which, as you can see, just go into essentially nothingness because Dubrovnik ends very abruptly in the actual landscape itself. But the botanical garden is super nice, considering how hot it can get in the area of Dubrovnik, particularly in spring and summer months. It's a perfect getaway to be in the shade, enjoying again some nature and hopefully some quiet time overall. There is also a fort in the area. There is a local legend, by the way, that suggests that there was a shipwreck, which is actually where Richard the Lionheart stopped by on his way back from the Crusades. And the place is surrounded in many legends and curses, which is actually an interesting thing to engage with, right? I think you'll find out a lot of these places with a lot of historical value always have some strange or peculiar, shall we say, legends to engage with. If you are able to get an actual guided tour of Dubrovnik with an actual guide and explore some of these ideas, I would very much recommend it. The facilities have improved a lot, but you kind of had to go and choose your own adventure, which made it a little bit tricky to navigate. Now, the botanical garden actually started in 1959, and it is a tropical and subtropical garden, so to speak. And there is also an area that has become very popular, which is sort of like a Dead Sea lake or well, whatever you want to call it, which is very good for scuba diving, and that has actually started to bring a lot more people in here. But like I said, as you can see, not a single soul when I took these pictures, which was early May. I believe it was between the 5th and the 10th of May. So something to consider and to truly, appreciate the area for what it is. It was actually a little bit disconcerting. I think in the whole day there was one ferry, properly speaking, which was the one I was in, that departed at around 11. We didn't even get up that early, and it was pretty quiet. So actually, for example, the bar and the sort of little shop for food wasn't even open because we weren't enough people in there. But we took some picnic stuff with us and actually made the best of our day because, I mean, who wouldn't pay? I think it was €7 return, probably has increased now and will be most likely more expensive in the summer. Who wouldn't pay €6, 50, €7, whatever it was, to see this? To be completely in the middle of nowhere in a little island, surrounded by beautiful vegetation, nature, everything that you want, and look at that, the beautiful karstic landscape that has been shaping this country through and through, and the landscape that a lot of people refuse to acknowledge. This is why I really must insist. Don't just go to Croatia for the beaches. If you want to go to Croatia for the beach, of course, I'm not going to judge you. I appreciate they are very beautiful, and indeed, in some of these locations, you would be able to access them. But why get lost completely in just that one beach where you have all of these nature, all of these landscapes, all of these beautiful moments to explore and engage with? Plus, I must also tell you, the beaches in Croatia are starting to become one of the most, crowded alongside with the ones in Spain. So, well, be mindful. That's all I'm saying. Meanwhile, if you decide to give Croatia a chance to, well, show you a different aspect of what it is, whether it is as a long weekend on a city break, whether it is going to the mountains on an archaeological journey, whatever you want, I think you will find this much more varied and three-dimensional country than what most, tourism agencies will necessarily promote it as. And again, that's not just to take away from these locations or whatever, but it's particularly important that in this day and age we start becoming much more responsible with the way we travel. So I hope this has sparked your curiosity to go to Croatia. I hope that it has given you as well different perspectives and maybe ideas of things to do. And as usual, if you ever are interested in any other destinations, you're very welcome to reach out. For now, though, this is where we shall bid you farewell. We hope that you have a lovely rest of your day. Happy traveling and take very good care of yourselves. Bye bye and see you on the next one.